on today's show.
What's the best novel writing schedule if you've got a job and kids and other activities? On this episode, we're going to take and debunk one of the biggest myths about writing a novel, and that is, I just don't have time. As you're going to see on this episode, I want you to think differently about time. It's not that you have time, it's just that you have the right amount of time that you dedicate to your book. It's easily the biggest objection I hear for people of why they've had trouble writing a book is, I just don't have enough time. In fact, today's episode, we're going to hear from Marissa Orr, who was like a lot of authors in that she had a busy full-time job, she had kids and a life going on, and had to figure out a new way in order to figure out how to fit the book into her life. One of the big surprising things that I've learned about it is that it's not necessarily about having lots of time. It's about how you are strategic about using the time that you have. Let's hear from Marissa a little bit to hear her approach to blocking off the time she needed in order to write a book, Lean Out, that became one of the big breakout successful books about the movement and female empowerment in corporate America.
So actually, I'm a very lazy person. There's this great quote by Anthony Bourdain where he talks about how there's this person inside that always just wants to sit on the couch and watch TV and smoke pot, and he's always trying to outrun that person.
Yeah.
That is me. I'm very impulsive. When I'm inspired, maybe I could write, a million, but then, I will go months without. So I'm not at what you would call disciplined. Mm-hmm. However, being a single mom of 3 and working at these full-time, very competitive jobs in the city, managing a household, I've learned that these things are learnable. So when I decided to write the book, it's been brewing in me at this point for 3 years, but I haven't done anything. And then I was at a conference for Facebook, and my nemesis was on stage, and my blood was boiling. I'm like, I will write this book. And I went home that night and Googled how to write a book. And that's literally how I started. I read everything. I went down the rabbit hole. And what I really learned about writing is the routine. So I will go to, when I'm interested in something, I go down the rabbit hole till I figure out the guts of it, and then I'm totally uninterested in it again. This is what happened with learning how to write a book and the discipline. I changed my whole life. I realized if I was ever going to do something like this, I needed to get discipline, because writing a book is all about that. Mm-hmm. And so I read all this stuff on the habits of great writers. I read this whole stupid book on the routines of 19th century, boring writers. Anyway, I understood that, I started waking up at 4:30 in the morning. I would write for an hour, and then I would get in the shower, get the kids to school, and I would go to my job at Facebook. Yep. And it sounds bad, but I have to tell you, I never felt more I was coming off a situation where I felt so powerless and at the whims of this horrible person, whatever. To wake up and write for a plan to tell my truth, it was tremendously empowering. Nothing bothered me as much after that at work. Anyway, so it was really the routine and training myself to do something even when I don't feel like it. And that's really the crux of it. My butt had to be in my seat at whatever time. I feel like this is so cliche, but I started meditating. I had to become a Buddhist to deal with the emotional turmoil at Facebook. So of course I read everything I could on. I was at work, namaste. I was trying to be Buddha. And that was a tremendous help too. That became the beginning of my morning routine, was to meditate. And that's mental training. It's mental. I felt like the mental version of Rocky. If you could imagine a movie where, that scene on the set, but the mental gymnastics is really my story. And I think the pressure of I have 3 kids and I have to pay rent and I have to feed them and I have to get out of this godforsaken company. Yeah. It just put so much pressure on me that, you crack, and whatever comes out, that's your character. Are you going to do something with it or move on, or, are you going to let it bury you? So that was, again, another I feel like we only have 20 minutes. I'm trying to talk as much as I can and say as much as I want.
I was going to say, so I think what's really interesting about it, and I'll just share this with everyone else. So what you tap into too is how important it is to have an emotional tie into your book. And, whatever that thing is, because whatever, you could have outlined this thing for years, but you needed that thing that you were going to pull you through it. Cause get up at 4:30 a.m. I go to bed at that time. I don't get up that time. It's not my thing. So, but you have to convince yourself behind it. And oftentimes you got to figure out that emotional thing that will pull you
right.
through.
It totally doesn't matter what time that you do it. Everything online's you should wake up early to be the hero of the world.
Exactly.
that was just when it worked for me. But it's as long as you are consistent with the time, it doesn't matter when.
Yeah. The emotional part of it is a powerful one. So talking about that a little bit here, you did talk about you had been sort of talking about these subjects and speaking about them and things like that as you write. How did you use conversations to be able to deepen the book a little bit? Because it was one of those, it sounds like that you were able to build the book from talking about it rather than thinking about it.
So I think it was both. I think way too much about everything. And I think that that's just my natural MO, which is great and horrible at the same time.
Make your book a part-time job. I love that approach and that mindset. And what we're going to do is talk about how you actually do that in a way that's not only effective, but also something that will get you to a point where you feel good about the progress you're making. One of the big things to know about books is that they are these larger undertakings. And one of the things that pulls people off them is feeling like they're not necessarily making as much progress as they thought or they believe. So it's important to remember that one of the important things that Marissa shares with us is to track and measure your regular sort of progress. Just putting time on your calendar and showing up for it is the best measure of progress when you're busy with other things, not necessarily how much word count or how much sort of manuscript progress you're making behind it. So step one is to sort of look at your week and say, how much time could I devote and dedicate to the book? I would tell you that unless you're able to dedicate at least 3 to 5 hours a week, then I would tell you to not think of yourself as writing a book. Say you're preparing or researching and thinking about a book, but anywhere less than 3 hours, I would sort of say you're not actively writing a book. But number one, look to see, can you dedicate at least 3 hours? And my advice is 3 to 5 hours a week is a great amount of time for anyone who's working and may have other family or children commitments in it. So that's step one, figure out the amount of time. Number two, you want to dedicate chunks of time. And chunks of time is really important. Sometimes people think well, I need to sort of figure out how to write 30 minutes here and 30 minutes there. That's sort of interesting. But what I will tell you is that one of the things that most writers will tell you is that there is kind of this getting starting phase. We kind of think about this as kind of getting going. In fact, BJ Fogg, who is the author of Tiny Habits, talks about this idea of getting over the first 5 minutes, because once you get past those first 5 minutes, things really flow. And so that's why I would sort of say is trying to break it up into chunks that are at least 2 hours is important. 90 minutes is probably the minimum, because once you get past those 5 minutes, you've kind of then got the rest of the time. So maybe that takes you 10 minutes to get going, but then your time chickens. So I would sort of say at least 90 minutes, really ideally 2 hours. So that's the second thing. Number one, figure out the total time. Number two, figure out at least 2 hour blocks of time. And then number three, and this is crucial, put the time on your calendar. Put it on there and make sure it says book writing. Make sure other people can see it and other people can know it. And that's a big thing. You want to hold yourself accountable to it in that way. This is the time. So that's the first phase. Figure out the time, figure out chunks of time, and then put those times on the calendar. Now, here's the real secret. And this is a really important one, to not just sort of blocking off the time, but this is about adding accountability to it. And that's where you involve other people. Once you put time on the calendar, there's 2 hacks that I've seen work really, really well. Number one is actually inviting someone else to that time, putting that on the calendar. You can put it as free on their calendar, but so they know this other person, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your best friend, your roommate, but you got to make sure that they know you have this time on your calendar. For me, what that meant is I told my wife I was going to be writing from 9 p.m. until midnight on Monday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. When I told her that, suddenly we had this accountability. So figure out a way to involve other people into it. And number two, and this might be the biggest one, and one of the most important things you can do, especially when you're busy with other things, is celebrate when you show up for that time, not what you accomplish. So celebrate it. Make sure it's a fun thing. High five yourself and other people along the way in it. If you have an editor or writing partners, make sure you celebrate the fact that when you put in the time, you do it. Writing a book, treat it like a part-time job. Put at least 3 hours a week that you're going to dedicate to it and at least 90-minute blocks of time. Put those on your calendar and make sure, if you can, to share that calendar with other people, whether it's a partner, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a colleague, whatever it is. And lastly, make this process something celebratable. So when you find that you hit your time for the week here, hey, I got all 3 of my sessions here, high five, make it happen here. Writing a book is an important thing. It's not a massive thing that takes over your entire life, but you have to put time on the calendar and treat it as such. That time on the calendar is important. Show up, get those first 5 minutes going, and then roll the end of it. Celebrate that you showed up, and you will have great progress and success. Remember, never write alone. Involve other people in it. Make this calendar something you share with other people. That's the secret to writing. And if you've enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe. We like to share tips about imposter syndrome, about writing techniques, all those things to help you make sure that you don't feel alone. And if you do need that community, definitely reach out here. We try to find ways to pair authors up so they have a community around them when they're writing so that they also never write alone.
All right, we're going to do jazz hands. We're going to do jazz hands.
Jazz hands? I thought you were going to have us do like a horn.
I was, but then I was like, jazz hands is cooler.